calculated breach of trust.
This is a major cancer on the way that information that is vital to the national interest is being undertaken.
I see a case of aggressive harvesting of confidential information and relationships by a predatory group of tax avoiders salivating at the way in which they can make money.
We need to find where this has happened and throw the book at people, and we need to make sure it doesn't happen again.
The extraordinary actions of PwC to use information from advising on policy design to help international clients avoid paying tax shone a light on the unethical underbelly of consultancy and how governments have become reliant on the so-called shadow public service.
I will declare open this hearing of the Senate Finance and Public Administration References Committee for the inquiry into the means.
Around a decade ago, PwC advisor Peter Collins was engaged by the federal government to redesign laws to crack down on multinational tax avoidance. At the same time, he was leaking confidential information to his colleagues to help clients of PwC from being affected by the changes, sparking a federal inquiry into the integrity of consulting services.
The failures identified should never have been allowed to take place. What happened is totally unacceptable.
It was almost depressing every time I started a new section of the report, because it basically reinforced at each level how crap things were inside your business. I mean, it was just terrible.
The Senate inquiry, pushed initially by Green Senator Barbara Pocock, released its final report today, recommending a significant overhaul of the way governments use consulting services.
The committee recommends that PwC be open and honest by promptly publishing detailed information about the involvement of PwC partners and personnel, including names and positions, in the breach of confidential government information.
We need transparency. The first recommendation of this committee was PwC should tell the truth. We are nowhere near that yet.
There are also several recommendations for the Department of Finance to address conflicts of interest, including amending the Supplier Code of Conduct. There have already been some consequences for the Big Four firms, with the federal government moving away from relying on consultants and attempting to rebuild a hollowed-out public service.
I would like to see, as time passes, a recovery of incredible pride in doing the work of being a public servant and doing the work that serves your fellow Australians. Not entirely motivated for profit, but motivated for the common good.
Last month, Treasury released a consultation paper putting options to rein in and clean up the consultancy sector, raising questions about whether audit and consulting partners should be able to share profits and whether the sector is capable of self-regulation at all, while stressing the need to preserve the audit, tax and insolvency services the Big Four firms provide. But for now, the questions of how to regulate the sector and how consultants are used by government in future still remain. Green Senator Barbara Pocock joins me now. Welcome to 7:30, Senator Pocock.
Good to be with you, Laura.
You've supported many of the recommendations of this Senate inquiry that was released this afternoon, but you say that they only go 10% of the way towards fixing the problems that have been exposed. Where are the shortcomings?
Well, I think what we have in this report is a really very fulsome account about the disastrous events of the last year that have gradually emerged about the behaviours of the Big Four consulting firms. And there's a lot of agreement about the narrative and agreed outrage about the way the Australian community has been affected by these events. I think where the parting of the ways is on what we should do about it. And the Chair's report, it's the Chair's report, Senator Richard Colbeck was the Chair of the committee, and of course he was in the government of the Morrison government, which saw many of these events unfold. And I think what we see there is essentially a set of recommendations that go only a small part, 10%, as you said, of the distance we need to travel. We really need to respond, and the Australian community, I think, want us to respond to really egregious failures in PwC, but beyond them in the larger consulting sector more broadly. And we need to look to the governance, to the conflicts of interest that have been very costly to the Australian public, and we need to take action well well beyond, monitoring, reporting, recommending further reports. It's time to actually face up to the challenges that this narrative sets out, and we in the Greens want to see strong action to curtail behaviour which is unacceptable, I'm sure, to most Australians.
Beyond the specific instances of bad behaviour, there is this broader systemic issue of the fact that consultancies have become such a huge shadow workforce for government in tens of thousands of people. You would acknowledge, wouldn't you, that the current government has gone some significant way to trying to shift that? What else needs to happen in terms of the basic public service workforce capacity?
I certainly do acknowledge that there is a commitment to pulling back from the extraordinary expansion of consulting into the public sector in the last 20 years. I mean, the Big Four, a quarter of their income now out of the public sector, and their total revenue in 2023 was $11 billion. So they are making a lot of money in the public sector and doing work which is core public sector work. So we need to see more of that, of the cutting back, and we recommend in the Greens recommendations there should be a 15% target for 5 years, 15% a year, offset by growth in the capability of the public sector. We need to rebuild the public sector across the board, and that means, building the strategic capability of the public sector and making sure that we aren't contracting out at great expense. We've heard reports through this inquiry of profit rates in the private sector of 50 to 60% for work that public servants can do much more cheaply, more effectively, and we can put that money to the education, to the health, to all the other public services we need. And we need to make sure that those public services are provided in the public interest, not for private profit. That's the work that lies ahead. So yes, steps have been taken that are important first steps. We need to go a lot further, a lot faster to reclaim the public service for the public interest.
Well, what about making the sector itself more accountable? I mean, has the Senate inquiry sort of been overtaken to some extent by a Treasury consultation paper which has raised the spectre of slashing the size of partnerships and forcing some of them to be incorporated? What would you like to see happen here? Are you satisfied that that Treasury process is sufficient?
I think we have taken an enormous amount of evidence through the 15 months of this inquiry, the many submissions, the experts like Alan Fells, like Graham Samuels, who have come to us and said it is time that we dealt with structural conflicts of interest. We've got very big firms here, the Big Four, who do both audit and consulting work. They do the audit work for 90% of the Australia's largest companies, the ASX 200, and at the same time are pitching for business. And it compromises the integrity of our audit system, so we need to deal with that problem. But we also have very large organisations, these Big Four, up to 1,000 partners. Now that defies a true partnership relationship. We need to pull back the cap on the size of those partnerships. We think 100's about right. I mean, you can't be a big partnership if you're a GP or an architect. There's no rational reason for that very large size allowed for accounting firms. So we need to cap that. And I think the evidence about this, Alan Fells was very clear, is we need to make those partnerships less opaque, and they should meet the same governance requirements of other large corporations in Australia. They are very large and they aren't required to be transparent about their books, about their governance, about the directors' responsibilities, about how to treat whistleblowers. And we're paying a big price. And I think one of the reasons this inquiry has just gone from scandal to scandal is that the opaque nature of governance inside the Big Four is not working and really needs a structural fix. And we've made specific recommendations as the Greens on those issues. And I think it's time, it's past time to fix that. This international problem, which is really holding us back in seeing into the way these organisations work. And they need to work much more effectively and transparently.
So would you be satisfied with the sorts of recommendations that people like Alan Fells and Graham Samuel have come up with, which is by reducing the size of the partnerships and forcing them to incorporate, you would sort of start to get more transparency, the capacity for tax minimisation would also be reduced, all those issues. Would that be satisfactory to you?
I think that they are two very important things: to separate audit from non-audit activities and to cap partnerships. I think they're very, very important. Partnerships should be reduced to no more than 100 in the Greens' view. But I think there's some other things we need as well, Laura. These firms make very sizable political donations to the major parties. In the last 10 years, 6.6 million to the major parties as political donations. Now, that's something that doesn't pass the pub test, and surveys of Australian community members say that they have no time for that. It's time to end political donations from people who are at the same time contracting for government work. It doesn't work. It's both, potentially an actual conflict of interest, but certainly a perceived conflict of interest. So that question of political donations and of the manipulation of the revolving door, people who move out of the public sector into consulting and have, their knowledge, their intelligence about the public sector actively, aggressively farmed for future commercial opportunities. There are a bunch of governance things that we really need to fix if we're going to curb the conflicts of interest that are just, they don't pass any kind of probity test.
Well, finally, if we go back to the firm where all this began, what actions do you think need to be taken against PwC, and what role should it have with government? I mean, should it be singled out? Were its actions so different to the other big firms that it requires particular sanctions in terms of what work it gets from the government and what it needs to provide in terms of information about those leaks in the first place?
Well, if we go right back to the beginning of this scandal, we were asking from the beginning for PwC to tell the Parliament and the Australian people who did what in using confidential tax information to assist the world's biggest multinationals to avoid tax. And they have yet to provide us with information about people in Australia and overseas and what they did. So the only person, one person, has paid a price within PwC, Peter Collins, the loss of his tax agent status for 2 years. And there are a bunch of inquiries still underway. The Federal Police are investigating, the ATO, the Tax Practitioners Board, multiple inquiries. I've referred the matter, their behaviour, to the National Anti-Corruption Commission. So until those inquiries are complete and all their implications put in place, the government should not be doing business with PwC, and it's my view, and we recommend this in the report, given the misdemeanours that are on the public record, they should not be consulting to government for at least 5 years. The conflicts of interest, the misuse of information, it's all there on the public record. Australians are furious about it. The Treasurer has said he's outraged. So there really needs to be a serious long-term consequence for PwC, not just running a story about a single bad apple, punishment for just one. That doesn't hold up. This report's evidence is very clear that this is not a bad apple scenario. It's a structural problem within PwC, and it extends to the broader consulting sector and the really pressing need to improve governance and management in the Big Four consulting sector.
Well, lots of big issues there, and thank you for talking to us about them tonight.
Thank you, Laura. Good to be with you.